Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to share with you 7 tips on how to plan and go on a scouting trip. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Patricia Brooks, and I'm an American living in the south of France and have been since 2018. And I help people who are ready to start the next chapters of their lives living and thriving in a foreign country. And I help them to move through fear and self-doubt so that they can finally take that leap and live the kind of life they know they were meant to. And on this channel, I talk about my life in France, about moving abroad and how to find the confidence and courage to do the things that matter most to you. And today I'm going to talk about the scouting trip, otherwise known as an exploratory trip. And the reason I'm sharing this today is last week I got an email from somebody that I know who is planning a scouting trip in the fall. And she sent me an email that had a list of the 5 or 6 cities that she wanted to visit. And she asked me for some tips or some things to look out for on her scouting trip. And I thought, that would be a good video to make. And so here we are. So number 1 is something that she's already doing. She said in her email that she'd seen so many beautiful towns and cities in France that kind of looked a little bit too good to be true. So she wanted to come and see for herself. And that's my first tip. If you have the means, if you have the time, you need to come and visit the place that you are considering calling your home. And I say that because a lot of times online things look a certain way, or people can love a place, and when you get to that place, you just don't understand what the appeal is, and you can be disappointed. So I think it's always best to go and see for yourself. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 has to do with navigating the country once you're here. You might come to Paris and then want to take the train to other places. And this is something that I learned last year, and that is that not all train trips or tickets are made alike. I took a trip to the US and I had to go up to Paris to fly out of Charles de Gaulle, and I missed my connection in Nîmes. And I had bought a ticket from the service called Ouigo. Now, to me, Ouigo, it was a train ticket, right? It runs on the same rails that all of the trains run on. And so I didn't know that there was a difference. But when I missed that connecting train, I found out, because there I was in Nîmes, flustered because I missed my train, got off at the wrong stop because the train stations were similarly named, and I got off at the one station too soon. So I went into the ticket office and said, I'm going to need to change my ticket. I just missed my train. And they said, looked at my ticket, looked down and said, we can't help you. And I said, what? I don't understand. She said, this is a Ouigo ticket. This is not an Inouï ticket. Ouigo, Inouï, there's a we in there. To me, it was all the same, but it wasn't. And so there I am, unless I wanted to pull out my computer and look for tickets on my own, and being frustrated and flustered and trying to get the next available train, I decided that I was just going to go with Inouï and buy my ticket through them. And it was a lesson learned. I think that if you know going in that that's a possibility, and if you missed your train or there's some other service that you were expecting but weren't aware of it because you didn't know the services were different, then you can say, I knew that, and I'm going to deal with it. But I didn't know that, and it was something that added to my frustration. So number 3 is build some flexibility into your plan. Now, the email that I got had 5 or 6 cities, and she had the time frames that she was going to stay in each of those. 2 days here, 3 days here, 4 days there. And that is something that I did with my first scouting trip. I really wanted to have a hotel or an Airbnb to stay in, have my train tickets all bought before I got here, because I'm a project manager. I like to have a plan and have that plan laid out for me. But sometimes when you're looking for the right place, you don't know which, or all of the times, you don't know which city or town is going to speak to you. And so you might have this plan and feel like you have to stick to the plan because you've already reserved the Airbnb or you've already bought your train tickets. And so building flexibility into the plan, like knowing where you're going to start and where you're going to end, and the cities in between that you would like to see, could allow you to have that flexibility. Now, the story I want to share with you is when I came to Perpignan on my first scouting trip. This was just kind of a city that I saw in a guidebook. It wasn't really even on my initial itinerary. And I came on a day trip from Toulouse. And it was a Sunday and everything was closed. And it was an ugly day in May. And it was chilly and it was drizzly. And I had this aha, I think this is my new place. And I was only there for a day when everything was closed. So at the end of that day, I got back on the train, went back to Toulouse. A day later, I got back on the train up to Lyon, which is about a 4-hour train ride. And when I got to Lyon, I scouted during one day, and all I could think about was Perpignan. And so what I wound up doing was buying another train ticket, getting back on the train, going back 4 hours to Perpignan to see if what I felt was real. And so had I had this idea of, oh, this is kind of a flexible thing, I might have avoided that extra trip. Number 4 is treat this trip not like a vacation, but as if you're living here. So if at all possible, stay in an Airbnb or vacation rental by owner, go to the grocery store or the market, buy your food, take out your trash if necessary, do your recycling if necessary, so that you can get a real sense of what it might be like to live in this place. And some of the inconveniences you might have if you're doing laundry and there's no dryer, you'll get a sense of that. And take it seriously, because when we visit someplace and we're on vacation, it's relaxing, right? We're eating out all the time. We're going to shows. We're just living it up. But when you're moving to a place, that's not what it's going to be like. And so mimic the experience of real life as much as possible. Have you ever gone on a vacation someplace and you were just head over heels for this place and thought, oh, I could live there? Let me know in the comments. That's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. Now, number 5 has to do with what you envision for your new life in your new country. What are the things that you see yourself doing as hobbies? How are you going to occupy your time? And this is important for a couple of reasons. One is so that once you get to this place, that you have another project to start and you're not feeling so isolated or alone, or you're in your head thinking, oh, was this such a good thing? Which is something that happened to me. But the second reason is then you can make that a part of your scouting trip. So I have a client who loves volunteering, and that is definitely going to be a part of her new life in France. And so I suggested to her that she check out what volunteer organizations are going to be in the towns that she's going to scout out. And she says, oh, that's a really good idea. And the reason I think this is important is because when you visit a place, you'll get a sense for the place of, what it's like to shop there, what it's like to cook in the Airbnb that you're in. But if you are going to have an activity that's going to be a big part of your life, if you can meet some of the people who you might be engaging with when you're doing that activity, that will give you a better sense of, does this feel like home? Is this a place I could see myself living or not? Because the people and how they welcome you or not will be a big indicator. And I say to do this even when your language skills aren't where you think they need to be to volunteer. And the reason I say that is I have a client who is living in Portugal. And about 1.5 years ago, on one of our coaching calls, she shared with me that, in 18 months, when my Portuguese is where it needs to be, so that I can volunteer, I'm going to volunteer, even though this is something that's been a big part of my life in the U.S. But one thing I am going to do is I'm going to walk over to the food bank and see if it is in walking distance, see how close it is. And so that's what she did the following week. And the next week on our call, she shared with me this story that she went to the food bank to see, how close it was. She walked there, it was fairly close, and it was open. And so she kind of popped her head in the door and introduced herself and said, yeah, in 18 months, when my Portuguese is much better, I'm going to come and help you out. And they said, yeah, no, your Portuguese is good enough. We would love to have your help, and we need your help. And so that following week, she got on the calendar and started working at that food bank, and has ever since. And that has really been a bright spot in her life. And so if you can kind of back that up to a scouting trip and get a sense for the people, and they can kind of know who you are before you move there, then you can start to make inroads. And I did something similar, not with volunteering, but with Weight Watchers. I was a member of Weight Watchers in the U.S., and also with a meditation center that had a sister meditation center in Richmond, Virginia. And so on I think it was my second scouting trip, when I knew Perpignan was the place, I reached out to them ahead of time and said, I'm going to be there. And I made an effort to go to a meditation session. I made an effort to go to a Weight Watcher session, so that then once I moved to Perpignan, I felt like, these people know me even just a little bit, and it made it easier for me. Number 6 is know yourself. And what I mean when I say know yourself is, are you somebody who thrives in a city, or do you prefer the countryside? Are you somebody who loves the mountains or needs to be near water? Because that can help inform the places that you visit. If you have only 2 weeks and you want to go to 10 cities, that's going to be a very aggressive scouting trip, and you might not get the information you need because you might not have enough time to really get a real sense of the places you're visiting. But if you know that I don't want to live in a big city, and I know I want to be in a smaller village, then you can mix some of those places that aren't really going to be suitable for you and spend more time in the places that it's more likely that you're going to be living in. I didn't know this about myself. I'd never lived in a city. And in 2018, I moved to Perpignan, a city of 120,000 people, inside the city, not on the suburbs or not on the outskirts. And for me, it was fine, but at the end of that year, I could not find the neighborhood that felt like home to me. And so I wound up moving slightly out of the city, about 40 minutes outside of the city, to a place that felt more like home to me. Had I known that about myself, maybe I could have avoided, spending a year in Perpignan. Not that it was a horrible year. I learned a lot about myself, and I think it was a good starting point. But that might have helped inform where I decided to settle. And the final tip is enjoy yourself. There's a lot of pressure to get it right, to get the location that you're going to move to right. And that's understandable, especially if you're planning to buy. But if you are planning to rent, I think you can relax a little bit more, because know that, like me, you can change your mind and move to a different place. And if you get a sense of the region, at least, and if the region feels good, then that pivot or that change might be a smaller change. Like for me, it was just a 40-minute drive outside of the city. And when you go to a place and you're scouting a place and you're a little bit more relaxed about it, you can really sense what your intuition, what your gut is telling you about certain places. If you are going through a checklist and you're like, oh, it's got to have this and it's got to have that, and you're anxious about it, then you're going to be less likely to be able to sense, yeah, this feels really good, or yeah, no, this is not for me. You're going to be in your head and not in your body, which is where you feel intuition. And intuition, along with your checklist, put together are the things that are going to help you to find your new home. All right? So those are 7 tips that I have for planning a scouting trip and going on your scouting trip. Which one of those do you think is the most important? Let me know in the comments. Now, if you are planning a move abroad, planning a scouting trip, want some information about what it's really like to live in France, and you want to pick my brain, I have services just for you. I have an information session where you can ask me questions about my life in France. I have a discovery session that if you are struggling with finding that confidence and courage to make that leap, or maybe you want some support in planning your scouting trip. How do I outline it? Maybe what are some good cities or towns for me if this is who I am? We can have that discovery call, see how we could best work together, and go from there. So I'm going to put links to all of those in the description so that you can get on my calendar and we can have that conversation. Now, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you again next time. Bye for now.